First dates, an exciting step into the unknown. But what happens when that unknown turns into your worst nightmare? Tonight, we bring you 12 chilling tales of first dates that went horrifyingly wrong. These aren't just urban legends. They're true stories that will make you think twice before swiping right. So grab a blanket, dim the lights, and prepare yourself for an unsettling journey through the darker side of dating. Before we dive in, remember to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. And now, let's uncover the horrors lurking in these true scary dates. It started like any other date night, the kind you read about in rom-coms. We met at a local bookstore during a rainy Saturday. He was friendly, charming even, with this disarming laugh that made me forget how awkward first encounters could be. We exchanged numbers, and within a week we had plans for dinner. The restaurant was cozy, dimly lit with flickering candles on each table. It felt like the perfect setting for a fairy tale evening. But as the night went on, something strange began to surface. We talked about favorite movies and travel dreams. But the way he described his life didn't line up. His childhood home changed locations halfway through his story. He mentioned working at a tech company, but when I asked about the industry, his answer was vague, like he was making it up as he went along. I laughed it off at first, maybe nerves, but I couldn't shake this nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. The moment I got home, I sent the picture of his ID to a friend of mine who worked in background checks. 30 minutes later, she called me. Her voice was shaking. "Get out of your house, right now." The man I'd just spent the evening with had served time for aggravated assault under a different name. As I hung up, there was a knock at my door, soft, timid. "Hey, I think you left your jacket in my car," his voice called. My jacket was hanging in the hallway. I held my breath, stepping quietly away from the door. The knock came again, louder this time. "I know you're in there. I just want to talk." I grabbed my phone and called the police. By the time they arrived, he was gone. But his wallet? It was on my front step, open with the ID card missing. It was supposed to be a group dinner, a reunion of old friends. That's what I was told, at least. When I arrived at the restaurant, though, the table was set for two. My heart sank. He was already seated, smiling like he'd won the lottery. "Change of plans," he said, shrugging. "Everyone else canceled. But hey, we've got the whole evening to ourselves." My instincts told me to leave right then and there. But I didn't want to be rude, or worse, cause a scene. So I sat down, hoping it would be quick. The waiter arrived and handed us menus. Before I could even decide, he said, "We'll take the house special and a bottle of wine." The waiter glanced at me, hesitated, then walked away. I stared at him. I didn't even get a chance to order. He just grinned. "Trust me, you'll love it." The wine arrived first. I barely touched mine, but he kept refilling my glass. I tried to keep the conversation light, but he steered it into uncomfortable territory, asking about my past relationships, whether I lived alone. My stomach churned. I excused myself to use the restroom. On my way back, I overheard him talking to the waiter. "Make sure you take your time bringing the check," he said. "I want tonight to last." Panic set in. I went straight to the front desk and asked if there was a back exit. The hostess nodded, her eyes wide with understanding. I slipped out and sprinted to my car. As I fumbled with my keys, I saw him through the restaurant window, searching the room. His expression wasn't just confused, it was furious. I sped out of the parking lot, shaking. I didn't stop until I reached my apartment. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a message. "Where did you go? I thought we had a connection. You can't just disappear like that." Blocked. I'd been chatting with him online for weeks before we finally met. A coffee shop seemed safe enough. The first half of the date was fine, nothing special, just small talk and lattes. But as the minutes ticked by, his demeanor shifted. He leaned in too close, his eyes scanning me like he was memorizing every detail. "You're not exactly what I expected," he muttered, sipping his coffee. "Your pictures looked different." My smile faltered. "Is that a compliment?" He shrugged. "I just thought you'd be taller." I laughed awkwardly, already planning my exit. 15 minutes later, I told him I had errands to run and needed to head home. He didn't argue, just smiled and said, "See you soon." As I pulled out of the parking lot, I noticed a car pull out behind me. Same color, same model. At first, I brushed it off as coincidence, but when I turned onto my street and saw the car slow down, my chest tightened. I parked and waited, holding my breath. The car idled at the corner for a long, agonizing minute before finally driving off. I thought it was over until 2 days later. I came home from work and found a small box on my doorstep. No address, no note. Inside was a single empty picture frame. My stomach dropped. He knew where I lived. I reported it to the police, but without proof there wasn't much they could do. That night, as I lay awake in bed, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You look beautiful today. I'll see you again soon." I wasn't the type to trust easily, but when a mutual friend set me up on a date, I decided to give it a chance. "He's sweet," she'd said, "into old movies and cooking." It sounded safe. What could go wrong? We agreed to have dinner at his place, something I'd normally never do on a first date. But he'd been so polite, and the thought of homemade pasta was tempting. When I arrived, his apartment was immaculate, almost too immaculate. Everything had a place, books stacked symmetrically, decorative candles unlit but precisely aligned, the scent of rosemary and garlic filling the air. For the first half hour, it felt normal. Then, as I followed him to the dining room, I noticed a display case. Inside were rows of delicate vintage jewelry, bracelets, necklaces, hairpins, all distinctly feminine. "Oh, are these family heirlooms?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. He glanced at the case, smiled faintly, and shrugged. "Mementos," he said, "from people who've come and gone." His voice was so calm. I laughed nervously, unsure if I'd misheard. "People? Like friends?" "Something like that," he murmured. The pasta was delicious, but my stomach was churning for a different reason. I excused myself and wandered toward the restroom. That's when I noticed a drawer partially open in the hallway dresser. Curiosity overpowered caution. Inside were old driver's licenses, at least a dozen. Different names, different states, but all women. My breath caught. Maybe he was joking, right? Or maybe I was wrong. I stepped back, forcing myself to breathe. He appeared behind me, silent as a shadow. "Everything okay?" he asked, his tone soft but oddly deliberate. I swallowed hard. I just needed to freshen up. His eyes stayed on me for a few seconds too long. I made up some excuse about an early meeting the next morning and said I had to leave. He didn't argue. Instead, he walked me to the door, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder as he said, "We'll pick up where we left off next time." I didn't run. I didn't want him to see my fear. But as soon as I reached my car, I called my friend and told her everything. The next morning, I saw an article in the news. A missing woman's picture flashed across my screen. The necklace she was wearing in the photo, I'd seen it in his display case. We met online. He had the kind of smile that felt warm and sincere, and his texts were thoughtful and funny. When he invited me for a picnic by a quiet nature trail, I thought it sounded perfect. The world felt too noisy, and the idea of something peaceful appealed to me. He picked me up in his car, a blue sedan that smelled faintly of pine air freshener. The trunk was already packed with supplies. "For the picnic," he'd said cheerfully. "You never know what you'll need." I didn't think much of it until I noticed something glinting in the back seat, a pair of ropes neatly coiled. And then I saw the trunk lining, plastic sheets like you'd use to cover furniture, or something else. "Are you planning to camp after this?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. He glanced at me, his smile never faltering. "You could say that." My stomach twisted. Maybe I was overthinking things, maybe he was quirky. But as we walked along the path, the conversation darkened. He talked about how people disappeared sometimes, how easy it was for someone to go missing in the woods. "It's fascinating," he mused. "No one ever really knows what happened to them." I forced a laugh, the hair on the back of my neck rising. "I'm feeling a bit off," I lied. "Can we head back?" He tilted his head. "Already? We just got here." "Yeah," I said quickly. "I think it's the heat." For a moment, he stared at me, expressionless. Then he shrugged. "Of course, let's go." The walk back to the car felt like miles. My senses were hyper-aware of every step, every shift in the brush. When we reached the car, I made an excuse about needing to check on my dog and insisted on driving myself home from the trail parking lot. A week later, I saw his picture on the news. The caption read, "Wanted in connection with multiple disappearances." The nature trail had been searched after someone reported abandoned supplies. They found a campsite and 3 shallow graves. The dinner date was normal, almost boring, really. He was polite, a little quiet, but nothing set off any major alarms. When he asked if I wanted to come over afterward, I politely declined. He smiled, paid the check, and said, "Well, maybe next time." The next morning, I saw him near my office building, standing across the street. I told myself it was a coincidence, but then I saw him again that evening, parked near the grocery store where I usually shopped. The fear set in on day 3 when I noticed his car idling at the end of my block. I kept telling myself I was imagining it until I found a note on my car windshield. "You can't hide from me." I filed a police report, but without direct proof, there wasn't much they could do. I changed my routine, took different routes to work, stopped going to my favorite places. But somehow, he was always there. One night, I came home and found something on my doorstep. A bouquet of black roses and a small box. Inside the box was a key to my apartment. I moved out the next day and stayed with a friend for 2 weeks while I arranged for a new place in a different city. I thought I'd escaped him. But one night, months later, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You moved, but I found you." We matched on a dating app, and he seemed like the total package. Polite, funny, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. After a week of chatting, he offered to pick me up for dinner. It felt a little old-fashioned, but I said yes. He pulled up in a clean sedan, smiling warmly as I climbed in. The first few minutes of the drive were pleasant. We joked about bad first dates and swapped stories about our favorite movies. But soon I noticed something strange. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror, his jaw tight. At first I thought he was just being cautious. "Are you okay?" I asked, laughing nervously. "Just making sure we're not being followed," he replied, his voice calm but firm. My stomach dropped. I laughed it off, hoping he was joking. Followed? By who? Don't worry about it, he said, his eyes darting between me and the mirror. I'll handle it. We arrived at the restaurant and he seemed to relax. Dinner was great. He was attentive, asking thoughtful questions, and I started to feel like maybe I'd overreacted. But when we left, he tensed up again. Mind if I take a different route? He asked as we got back in the car. Why? I asked, my unease growing. I just need to make sure it's safe, he said, turning onto a deserted road lined with trees. My heart pounded as I watched the familiar streets disappear behind us. Safe from what? He didn't answer. Instead, he reached over and locked the doors. Take me home, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Just one more turn, he muttered, his eyes flicking to the mirror again. I grabbed my phone and texted my roommate. Call me now. A second later, my phone rang. It's an emergency, I said loudly into the phone, hoping he'd hear the panic in my voice. I need to go home right now. He hesitated, then sighed and turned the car around. When we pulled up to my building, I jumped out without waiting for him to say goodbye. For weeks after, I felt like I was being watched. Shadows moving just out of sight, a car idling at the end of my street. I deleted the app and blocked his number, but sometimes I still wonder, was it me he was trying to protect, or was I the one in danger? He seemed perfect. We met at a local bar, one of those cozy places with dim lighting and soft music. From the moment he introduced himself, I felt at ease. He was charming, attentive, and asked all the right questions. Halfway through our drinks, he excused himself to use the restroom. I smiled, sipping my cocktail, fully expecting him to return in a few minutes. But 10 minutes passed, then 20. Did he leave? I joked to the bartender. The bartender shrugged, busy with other customers. I checked my phone, no messages. Embarrassed, I paid the bill and left, chalking it up to a bad date. Maybe he got cold feet or had an emergency. The next morning, I woke up to a text from his number, but it wasn't him, it was his sister. Hi, the message began. I don't know how to say this, but my brother passed away yesterday evening. I found your number in his phone and thought you should know. My blood ran cold. I texted back, trying to make sense of it. I was with him last night. We were on a date. She called me immediately, her voice trembling. That's impossible. He was in a car accident on his way to the bar. He never made it. I sat frozen as she explained. His car had collided with a truck on the freeway. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The crash happened an hour before I met him, but I did meet him. I remembered his laugh, the way he held the door open for me, the way his hand brushed against mine as he reached for his drink. I hung up and stared at the receipt from the bar. His name was written at the top, proof that he'd been there. But when I called the bartender to ask if he remembered us, he said, "You were sitting alone all night." My best friend set me up on a blind date. He's your type, she'd insisted. You're going to love him. When I arrived at the cafe, I froze. Sitting at the table was my ex-boyfriend, the one who had broken my heart a year ago. He looked up and smiled like nothing had happened. "Hey," he said. "I'm glad you came." Confused, I sat down. "What's going on?" I asked. "Why are you here?" He tilted his head. "Have we met before?" I laughed nervously. Very funny. But as we talked, my confusion turned to unease. He didn't seem to remember anything about our past relationship. Instead, he told me stories that were eerily similar to moments we had shared, but with subtle differences, like a warped version of my memories. "I'm sorry," I said finally. "What's your name again?" He smiled. "Ethan." That wasn't his name. I excused myself to the restroom and called my friend. "Why did you set me up with my ex?" I asked. my voice shaking. "What are you talking about?" she said. "I set you up with someone named Ethan. You've never met him before." I hung up and returned to the table, but he was gone. On his chair was a napkin with 2 words scrawled in black ink. "Remember me." I didn't sleep that night, and every so often I still see him, in a crowd, at the store, standing at the end of my street. But whenever I approach, he's gone. I had been chatting with Mark online for a few weeks before we decided to meet in person. He suggested a quaint cafe in a part of town I wasn't familiar with, but his friendly demeanor put me at ease. When I arrived, Mark was already seated, a warm smile on his face. We ordered coffee and began talking. Initially, the conversation was light: hobbies, work, favorite movies. But soon he started steering the discussion toward more personal topics, asking about my family, my living situation, and whether I lived alone. Feeling uncomfortable, I tried to redirect the conversation, but he persisted. He mentioned he was looking for a serious relationship and wanted to start a family soon. I politely expressed that I wasn't on the same page, hoping he'd understand. As the date progressed, his questions became more intrusive. He asked about my daily routines, if I had a security system at home, and even if I kept spare keys hidden outside. Alarm bells rang in my head. I decided to cut the date short, citing an early morning meeting. Mark offered to walk me to my car, but I declined. As I walked away, I could feel his eyes on me and a shiver ran down my spine. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I blocked him on all platforms and reported the incident to the dating site. A week later, I came across a news article about a man arrested for stalking and attempted burglary. The mugshot was unmistakable. It was Mark. I was grateful I had trusted my instincts and gotten out when I did. After connecting on a dating app, Jason and I decided to meet at a local art gallery. He seemed charming and knowledgeable about art, making the evening enjoyable. However, during our conversation, he mentioned he had looked me up online and found my social media profiles. He commented on photos I had posted years ago, recalling details I had long forgotten. While it was unsettling, I brushed it off, thinking he was just trying to get to know me. The next day, I received a bouquet of my favorite flowers at work. There was no note, but I suspected it was from Jason. That evening, he texted asking if I liked the surprise. I hadn't told him where I worked, and this intrusion into my personal space made me uneasy. I replied, thanking him but expressing that it was too much too soon. He apologized, saying he just wanted to make me feel special. I decided to take a step back, limiting our communication. Over the next few days, I noticed a car similar to Jason's parked near my apartment. I began receiving anonymous calls at odd hours, and once I found a note on my car windshield that read, "I'm always watching." Terrified, I reported the incidents to the police and moved in with a friend temporarily. I changed my phone number and made all my social media accounts private. Eventually, the harassment stopped, but the experience left me wary of online dating. I met Daniel at a mutual friend's party. He was charming, with a quick wit and an infectious laugh. We exchanged numbers and decided to go out for dinner the following weekend. The evening started well. We dined at a cozy restaurant, sharing stories and laughing. As the night progressed, Daniel began sharing more about his past, mentioning he had spent some time abroad. Curious, I asked about his travels. His demeanor shifted, and he became evasive, saying it was a dark period in his life. Not wanting to pry, I changed the subject. After dinner, we parted ways, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I decided to do a quick online search and was shocked by what I found. Daniel had been involved in a criminal case overseas, accused of serious offenses, but acquitted due to lack of evidence. Disturbed, I decided not to see him again. When he reached out for a second date, I declined politely. However, he became persistent, sending multiple messages and even showing up at my workplace unannounced. Fearing for my safety, I reported his behavior to the authorities and took steps to secure my personal information. Thankfully, he eventually stopped contacting me, but the experience was a stark reminder of the importance of being cautious and vigilant when meeting new people. "12 dates, 12 reasons to always trust your instincts." The world of dating may be unpredictable, but one thing is certain. Not every smiling face hides good intentions. As you navigate your own dating adventures, remember to stay cautious, stay aware, and most importantly, stay safe. If you enjoyed this collection of true scary dates, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales that'll keep you up at night. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your heart guarded.